Tell us about today. Was it more about style rather than substance for Apple in terms of what it had to say?
Yes, but they would also argue that liquid glass and the update to the interface across all operating systems is probably the biggest that they've done. It's interesting, the stock's off session lows, right? And it moved around, but I will go to kind of like the ticker and the moment that the keynote kind of started, and we swung from modestly positive territory down at 1 point to almost 2%. And you have to remember, this is Apple WWDC. It is a developers conference. A lot of what is announced is targeted at a group of people who are critically important in contributing to Apple's ecosystem. But it was almost kind of like a sell the news kind of event, both because a lot of what we heard Mark Gurman already reported, we all know that, and also because, expectations that Apple at some point is going to give us a lot more on AI, those expectations weren't met clearly.
Hey, Ed, let's stick on the liquid glass portion of this. As you mentioned, we've been speaking with Mark Gurman for weeks leading up to this, and he had the news weeks ago that there would be this unified interface across devices. My question then and my question now, after it being unveiled, is there a learning curve here for consumers? We've seen mistakes that Apple's made in the past with redesigns. Apple Maps more than a decade ago certainly comes to mind there. But is this going to be a learning curve? Like, how different is this going to be as an experience? I mean, there are over 1 billion iOS users out there. They're going to have to get used to this.
Yes, but 1 billion iOS users, but you have to think about it in the aggregate of people that use a broader Apple ecosystem. So a lot of liquid glass's inspiration comes from the work that Apple had done with Vision Pro. Literally the UI and UX of that experience using Vision Pro, the translucency of it. And so by making it uniform, having the same look across iPhone, Mac, iPad OS, and Vision Pro and Watch, it just makes you more familiar and, I guess, open to using the full hardware suite of products, let alone the software suite of products. But again, this is a stock that's been driven by trade headline, trade risk, tariff risk, pardon the expression. But it's a company who will tell you time and time again that they're just focused on iteration, design, executing on making things beautiful every year. And the problem is that last year, 2024, and indeed the year prior when they announced the Vision Pro, this event, the reason I'm here, all of us gathered at WWDC, there was much more of a clear, tangible news catalyst around it. This kind of goes back to what WWDC has always been, which has been for the people, the community that build for Apple, for the App Store, and for all of those devices.
So, okay, and that's, I guess, part of the value of going to WWDC, right, Ed, is kind of talking to some of these developers, feeling the mood about what they are saying. So what are you hearing from them? These are the kind of insiders, right? So I'm just curious. So,
we actually did get some AI news, and that piece of news was that Apple is going to open up its on-device LLMs, Apple's own work in proprietary models, to the developer community. The reason that that's a substantive piece of news is that's exactly how it works with OpenAI and Microsoft and Google and the Gemini teams. A lot of the success they've had in basically commercializing that technology is to say to developers, have at it. Here's the underlying model. Use it to make whatever you want to do better. And that makes the iOS, as an example, more appealing. So that was a big step forward today. But to the outside of the investor community, all of us that are consumers that have iPhones, there wasn't something there for us in that respect. And what was so interesting is that sort of drop in the stock at the start of the keynote. It actually coincided with Craig Federighi, the services software chief, saying, we will have a lot more to talk about with Siri later. Because this had nothing to do with that, the way that one as a consumer interacts with their phone right now.
Later? How much later? I mean, are investors and members of the developer community still waiting for a Siri that is as smart as some of these virtual assistants that we've seen from LLMs at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm here at WWDC, but I still was following what Gurman was putting in the blog in real time, and he made the point at the end that Craig was kind of at pains to point out this is what is new with Apple Intelligence. Here are all of the things that Apple Intelligence can do, rather than you're going to have to wait till later in the year to get more functionality out of it. On the other hand, like one of the things we got today was live translation in the iMessage and call context, but also through AirPods, right? But I even get like a sense of deja vu, because when I was at Meta Connect last fall, you know, Mark Zuckerberg was there on stage with his Ray-Ban Metas demoing exactly the same thing. You know, the ability to live translate in a nation like America where many people are bilingual, it's awesome when you consider the number of people that use an iPhone and are on the iOS system or macOS or iPadOS. But it ain't that new, and all the other technology companies are doing it as well. And that's kind of the frustration. It's like, give me the all singing, all dancing version of Apple Intelligence, which we interact with through Siri principally. And that's the bit you're going to wait for. And I didn't answer your question, Tim, because they didn't say later in the year.
No,
that's it.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, look, it's a question that, you know, nobody really has an answer for, and maybe Apple doesn't even know at this point.
Well, wait, it's kind of like, hey, Siri, like, when are you going to get better?
Okay, let's not make everyone's phones freak out, Carol Massar. Hey, Ed, before we let you go, you've been to a lot of these events, and as you mentioned, this is one for the developer community, and Apple's App Store and what you can do on an Apple device would be nothing without the developer community.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to hear from any developers, to speak to anybody who's attending this, and just get an understanding for what the vibes are in 2025 when it comes to the developer community?
So literally, we had a guy called Paul Hudson on the show earlier. He is the creator of Hacking for Swift, Swift being the platform that many use to code for OS application and OS software. And kind of what we've gone over is exactly why he was excited. That, you know, when you build for one of the Apple operating systems, you usually use an Apple tool to do so. And he's, you know, was pretty jazzed and excited. A lot of people look at Craig Federighi as like the man, the rock star, the silver fox of software. And on stage, you know, they got what they were asking for to some sense, that like having on-device LLM access is huge for a lot of developers. It just makes their life in doing something easier. But the root of your question is the most important bit. We have the App Store today for a reason. It is attractive to consumers, and there are lots of apps there that are made by third-party developers. You know, I'm trying to think of a great example that Apple didn't make and someone else did. But you get the idea, and that's why all of this kind of update today is tracked, because it adds value to the broader services and ecosystem offering that Apple has.
All right, basic metric. You've got Apple shares down 19% year to date. I look at something like Meta, it's actually up 19% year to date. So what is it that the investment community really wants to see from Apple to give it some love?
So I'm actually just pulling ChatGPT up on my phone, because I was talking to ChatGPT about this earlier. Fewer than 60% of analysts rate Apple a buy, the lowest among its big tech peers. Apple's AI efforts are seen as safe by analysts. Reminder, it trades at 27 times earnings, which is slightly off its historic high. The point is so far this year, it hasn't traded. I know, it's just so much fun to like use this as a tool, you know, inputting data from the Bloomberg. But like, so far this year, that 19%, it has nothing to do really with the AI story. As you guys know, it's tariff risk, the relationship with the administration and the President of the United States. But the risk going into today, and what was almost confirmed in the early minutes of that keynote, was, well, what if AI does become the key risk to the stock? Because investors lose patience and they say, we want to see something more tangible. It's a little unfair, because I don't think we went into today thinking we would get anything like that. It was really clear what we were going to get. It was for the developer community, and we did get it.
Ed, we do have some extra time with you, which we're grateful for. And you're our guy in Cupertino. We're keeping the seats warm for you here in the San Francisco studio. Liquid glass. You know, one thing that Apple is trying to figure out, and I think it's fair to say every consumer tech company is trying to figure that out, is the form factor for the must-have device of the future. You've talked a lot about where Humane did not work. We've talked to you a lot about what we could see from Sam Altman and Johnny Ive. When it comes to what you saw with liquid glass, does it give any indication as to how Apple is thinking about this?
It does. Look, what Mark Gurman's reported is that the 17 generation of iPhone will have glass curve size with no sort of screen border, right? And liquid glass as a concept, the kind of translucency of it, the way that whatever's in the almost the foreground of your smartphone screen or iPad screen is not interrupted by what's popping up. We think that there will be some hardware iteration on that to come. But you do raise a really good point, which is why have liquid glass uniform across all devices? Because increasingly, it's not the be-all and end-all, the thing that's in my right hand, a smartphone. It is that I take messages on my Apple Watch. Other smartwatches are available. I take, different platforms that I rely on OS for on my MacBook. Other laptops are available, etc. It's just a way of making it more uniform. So I think that there's definitely acknowledgement there. Whether the iPhone 17 has the features that Mark reported, we shall wait and see. But there was certainly a nod to that during the keynote, even if they didn't explicitly say, oh, by the way, the next version of the iPhone is definitely going to leverage this liquid glass concept.